In a world where we're accustomed to all the modern conveniences, all the different appliances, power outages can pose a significant challenge, particularly when it comes to cooking meals. It becomes even more of a challenge when it comes to options for cooking indoors during one of these emergencies or disasters. However, there are several ways to cook inside your home without electricity to make sure that you still have those hot meals when the power goes out. In this video, I want to go over 5 off-the-grid indoor cooking methods that you can use during an emergency situation, like a power outage, a winter power outage, or even when it's just not safe to venture outside, say in a hurricane or a blizzard. Also in this video, I'll be going over how efficient and useful each one of these methods are. And towards the end, I'm going to break down the cost effectiveness and the practicality of each of these cooking methods. So we're going to figure out which one is actually the best option to use. Now, before we get into this, I do want to say this is not the cooking hacks, the prepping hacks. This is not going to be about tea light candles or the tuna can burners or anything like that. In my opinion, if you're using those, one of two things have happened. One, you completely failed at preparing beforehand, or two, you are in a situation that is far worse than you ever expected. Basically, you and your supplies are separated. So while these methods and these different hacks are all good to know, good to put up in your mental bank, and if you need to rely on those in the future, you can, but they're not something we should depend on. So this video is going to be on the cooking options that we should depend on first and foremost, and then if all else fails, we are thinking about these other methods. Okay, so before we get into these different methods for cooking indoors during an emergency, I want to talk about the safety precautions first, because offing yourself is not a good survival strategy. It doesn't turn out well most of the time. The last thing that you want to do is, in a situation that's already bad, you don't want to add a house fire to that situation and basically turn yourself into a refugee. So when you're working with open flames in an emergency or disaster, and any time for that matter, it's always important to have a few things. And the first one is a fire extinguisher. And this is something we should have a few of around the house anyway. It doesn't get talked about all that much in preparedness circles, but it is absolutely one of those supplies that you just need to have, whether you're talking about preparedness or not. When you are using indoor grills and butane and propane and any sort of open fire, it's important to have a fire extinguisher. Also, with these cooking methods, you need to have a CO monitor. This just tells you if there's a gas leak in the house. You don't necessarily need that, but this is the model I got. A CO2 monitor is important because it lets you know what the CO2 levels are before it's too late. Whereas a CO2 detector will alert you that it's too late. You better get out of the house. So with a monitor, you can, monitor the situation as it's unfolding. And then finally, ventilation. And I know this is one of those sort of catch-22s. You're trying to stay inside and stay warm, but you have to crack a window open. Them's the rules. That's just the rules that we need to play by. If you can't use the appliances that are rated for that safety and all of those things, you're going to have to be as safe as possible, and that means cracking a window. It's sort of a situation where you just need to weigh the pros and cons of what you are going to do. So now that we've got the important safety stuff out of the way, let's go through these 5 different options that I tested out today. The first one is a hot plate with a power station. And this may be the easiest method, but also the least efficient method. You only have a certain amount of power in one of these battery banks or a Life PO4 battery, 100 amp hour battery. This power station that I'm using is 1250 watts. And you can see as I do this, it's taking up quite a bit of energy. So while this will work and you will be able to do it a time or two, you will not be able to use that generator or that battery for much else in an emergency situation. So it's not the most efficient method. You're going to use most of that energy that could be used to power cell phones and other smaller devices and make that battery last. Now, if you do have the means to recharge that in a day, say your house is hooked up to a Generac generator and that 500 watts that you're going to be using is not a big deal, then by all means, do what you can. Most of us, that's not an option though. Using this for just a half an hour would take about 500 watts, give or take. And to generate that in a day with a single 100 watt solar panel that some of these generators, these power stations come with, would take you almost 2 days in really good conditions to regenerate the power you used in a half an hour of using this hot plate. So not the most efficient use of the energy that you have in these power banks. There are other options that we're going to go through now that are better for that. Okay, so the next one I tried was the butane stove, and I actually tried a couple of these. There are some models that are recommended for indoor use. The one I'm using today is this Iwatani that is 15,000 BTUs. This one is made in Japan and a really, really nice stove. I really like this stove. Then you also have the Sterno stoves, which are a little bit less expensive, that are 9,000 BTUs. And then you've got the T-Chef Agni portable butane stove, which is made in Korea, which is about the same price as the Coleman stove, which is rated for indoor use. Now, I'm sure there's more. These are just the ones that I found that actually stated that they were safe for indoor use. Now, the other one that I have that actually says on the label, not rated for indoor use, that I tested out today is the 9,000 BTU GasOne GS3000. Now, I have read there are a couple GasOne stoves that are rated for indoor use, but I couldn't find anything on this one that specifically said that, but I didn't let that stop me. I wanted to see if it would trip the CO2 monitor. So with this Iwatani stove, it's really, really easy to set up. You just grab the canister, open it up. It's got a magnet where the canister seats, which makes it really convenient. It snaps right in there. You close the lid and then you just turn it on. And with this one, I tested how long it would take boiling on low. It took about 5 or 6 minutes, which is better than the electric burner actually, which was a little bit surprising. And then on high, it took right around 2.5 minutes. So, borderline microwave action going on there. But this thing worked really well. And as far as the carbon monoxide monitor, I used these stoves. I used the Sterno brand. I used the alcohol stoves. All the stuff I tested today, I was in the kitchen for 3-4 hours, and that monitor never changed one time. And like I said, I wanted to, since I had everything set up and I had these out, I wanted to try the GasOne that is quote unquote not recommended for indoor use. Now, this is not a recommendation. I'm not telling you what to do and what you shouldn't do or anything like that. I'm just showing you what I did and how it worked out for me. This GasOne, like I said, didn't trip the CO2 sensor, didn't even move the needle on this. Now, I did have the window cracked open just a little bit for all of these tests, but I did run it for an hour. I wanted to see that if it would trip that sensor in an hour. So I let it run for an hour straight on low heat, and it didn't do anything. Connecting the canister in this GasOne is fairly easy as well, although I do like the Iwatani canister, the magnet in there. I like that a little better. But this one, you just put it in there with the tab facing up. You put the little clamp on it, and then there's a switch on the front where you push this down and it tightens everything up. Now this, I didn't test this on high, but I did do the boiling test on low temperatures, and this was about the same as the Iwatani. Took about 5 minutes to bring that water to a boil. So this is a pretty viable option. Now, when it comes to these fuel canisters, they say they last between 2 and 4 hours, depending on the BTUs of the unit you're using. I purposely drained one can completely empty during my testing, and then I even let it go a little bit after I was done testing because I wanted to see what sort of time I got. And on low power, I got about 3.5 hours out of this canister. That was 2 hours on the GasOne stove plus an hour on the Iwatani. So pretty close. There were some times that I cranked it up to high as I was messing with this. So I will bet you that 4-hour mark is pretty good. And these cans of butane have a shelf life of about 10 years and even longer if they are stored properly. So this is a really good fuel source as far as storage goes. Next, I moved on to the alcohol stove, and there are a lot of different options when it comes to the types of alcohol stoves. You've got a number of different DIY options that are really easy to do and sort of fun projects. You've got the ones like the one I'm using today, which you can buy for really cheap on Amazon. And the alcohol I'm using today is the denatured alcohol, which I got a gallon for about $27. Again, at the end, I will break down the costs and the efficiency and all that. But with this one, what you want to do is put about 2 ounces of alcohol in there. And this gives you about 20 minutes of burn time. That's what I got out of it anyway. And the boil test with the alcohol stove, it took about 12 minutes to boil that 2 cups of water. So twice as long as both the hot plate and the butane stove. Now, the great thing about these is they are small and compact, and you can put them anywhere. They're really light, and the fuel in the large cans can store relatively safely. So these are a cool option just because they're so inexpensive. They're a good option to have just in case, maybe even alongside one of the other options or a couple of the other options with this. But they're so inexpensive that you could have a couple of these, and they make a really good option in some sort of emergency, disaster, grid down situation. So after the alcohol stove was done, I decided to try some canned heat with a little camp stove that I have. And there's a lot of different options you can use as far as how to set a little DIY setup up. You could get a little grill or a grate, put a couple soup cans below it or something and have that sit above there. But I have this little camp stove, so I decided to use that. And I decided to use the InstaFire Extra Hot Heat. I have done a video in the past where I compared the different heat output of the Sterno brand canned heat, this InstaFire canned heat, the really cheap 7-pen that you can get on Amazon, as well as tea light candles, just for the heck of it. And this is the one that worked the best as far as all the different types of fuel. Now, for the boil test, a single can of canned heat did not do the trick. After about 15 minutes, it was only around 175, 180 degrees, and I let it go even longer to about a half an hour, and that's where I decided to end it because there are just other options available, and waiting, an hour to have water boil is just not an efficient use of that fuel. So at a half an hour, I stopped it, and it was about 180, 182, somewhere in there. So a single can of canned heat didn't get water to boil. Now, what I decided to do with a single can of canned heat, and even though it won't get water to boil, I wanted to see if I could heat up some food. So I grabbed a can of soup, took the label off of it, and put it on this little single burner, and then set that aside while I tested out the Vesta InstaFire, which is the one that we are going to do next. So the soup got to about 130 degrees, which is actually a little bit too hot to eat. So it worked pretty well, and it did it in about 15 minutes. So Sterno, or the canned heat, is a good option as far as if you want to heat something up. It's just one single can is not going to boil water, which is why I went to the Vesta InstaFire and I decided to go ahead and use 2 cans and see how long this would take, or if it would boil water. And this Vesta InstaFire is a pretty cool unit. I've done a video on this in the past when I first got it, and I did some testing with it. It not only is a cooktop but it's also a little space heater as well. It's got a thermal fan, so when the base of that fan gets hot, it starts blowing heat out. Now, on their website, they state that it can heat up a room of about 200 feet, which is a very small room. But with this sterno, you also need ventilation. So again, there's that catch-22. But something like this could take that bite off of a really cold room. At any rate, as far as cooking goes, 2 cans did a little bit better than the single can, but it still didn't quite get it to boil in the 30 minutes that I had it testing. Now, I'm sure that if I would have covered this and retained that heat a little bit, it probably would have boiled in around 30 minutes, maybe 45. And even without it covered, it probably would have boiled in an hour or so. So I have no doubt that it would boil water. It would just take a really long time to do it, and you would burn through a lot of fuel trying to do it. So if it is you're trying to boil water for safety, there are other options that you should use rather than the sterno. But again, if you are heating something up, the video I did with the InstaFire, I made a few different things. I cooked an egg, I had some refried beans. There's a lot of different things you can do with it, and it will work. The boiling water, though, just not. I think there are better methods that you could use for that. So as far as which one of these would be the best option in preparedness to have in your emergency cooking kit or supplies, the GasOne butane that I purchased was about $16 for 4 cans. And each of those cans has about 4 hours of burn time on low, 4 hours per can. And I tested that out, and that is fairly accurate. So for $16, you get 16 hours of burn time. The denatured alcohol I purchased for $27 for a gallon. When you think about how the alcohol stove took about 12 minutes to boil 2 cups of water using 2 ounces of fuel, that means you have about 26 hours of burn time in a gallon of denatured alcohol, which seems pretty good. But when you think about how it's almost twice as much as the butane, and it takes twice as long to boil water, the butane is actually a far better deal than the denatured alcohol. But as I said earlier, there are certain situations where the alcohol stove might be the correct application. So maybe it's not something that you would want to use over and over again in some sort of situation where you didn't have power in the house, but there are certain situations where that would be good to have. So, and it's cost effective enough that it's sort of one of those why not just have a little bit stored. And then you've got the canned heat, which, you know, I'm not so sure about how viable something like this is. If you've got a few cans, sure, it's fine, but I wouldn't go out and stock up on a bunch of canned heat. The Sterno brand canned heats, you've got the 6-packs, which are 7 ounces, which is about half the size of the ones I was using today, and those burn about 2.5 hours. A 6-pack of those cost about $20. So for $20, you're looking at 15 hours of burn time. But it doesn't give off near the heat that the butane will, or even the alcohol stove will. And the InstaFire, the extra hot, the ones I was using, you can get a 3-pack of those for $10. And those have 6 hours of burn time, which is pretty comparable to the butane and the alcohol stoves. But again, you're not getting that heat output, and you're not going to be able to, it's not as efficient as the other two. So I just think while this InstaFire stove is cool, and it really is a cool supply to have, and I do have quite a few of these InstaFire canned heats for situations like this, but it's not something that I am going to go out and buy 15 cases of Sterno or canned heat and have those stored in my house. They do store for a very long time as long as they're under good conditions. But as you can see, the other 2 options are far better as far as efficiency and how much you're going to be able to use than the Sterno. So that's the 5 off-grid indoor cooking options that I tested today. I know there's probably a bunch more. If you have anything that I didn't hit in this video, make sure and leave a comment below. Maybe I'll gather a few of those and do a video in the future. Like I said earlier, my propane stove, my little Coleman, I could have probably brought that in and tested that out. I'm sure that it probably would have been fine with a little bit of ventilation. Again, that is not a recommendation or anything. That is just do what you feel comfortable doing. This video today was just me testing a few things and seeing how everything turned out. And for these tests, everything turned out fine. I am very happy with the Iwatani butane grill and the GasOne grill as well. Like I said, it doesn't have to be the super expensive one. I just like this one because of the quality, and I've heard so many great things about it. And then the alcohol stoves came a close second. Those are great. You're a little bit more limited as far as what you can do with them, but they absolutely will work, and they absolutely do put off enough heat that you will be able to use them for whatever you might want in a disaster situation. But that's it for today, everyone. If you like the video, make sure and hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Get notified whenever I do videos in the future. And like I said, leave a comment below and give me some of your ideas, even if they are just the prepping hacks, the cooking hacks that we could use. But with that, take care and prepare, everyone. We will talk to you all later.